Subnautica 2 is what I'm going to be calling one of the most controversial game releases in all of 2026. Screw Death Stranding 2 and Pragmatically, screw Forza Horizon 6 leaking a week before its official announcement launch, screw Pokemon Champions looking like it was built on a 2019 engine, screw Fortnite using AI generated artwork in a Porsche collab. None of that come close to what has happened here, because those marketing blunders aren't corporate miscalculations. What happened with Subnautica 2 was calculated. It was documented. Paper trailed attempt to steal $250 million from the people who built one of the most beloved survival games in the last decade. And a judge had to intervene to stop it. What I found wasn't a complicated story. It wasn't a story filled with nuances on each side. It was one with one of the most clear-cut cases of deliberate corporate betrayal that I've ever covered on this channel. How does a billion-dollar company, a company that owns one of the most profitable battle royale games on the planet, convince themselves that firing the people who built one of their most anticipated games was a smart move? And more importantly, what does it tell us about who actually owns the games we love? Because this story isn't just Subnautica. This story is about what happens when a publisher buys a studio, inherits its community's trust, and then treats the people behind it, the ones who created that trust, like lines on a balance sheet. And if you actually care about who makes the games you play, and whether they get to keep what they earned, this story is about you. To understand how we got here, we have to go all the way back to 2014, when a small development studio called Unknown Worlds, founded by Charlie Cleveland and Max McGuire. Those two founders were behind the release of the original Subnautica on Steam in early access. The concept was deceptively simple: a survival game set entirely underwater on an alien planet. No guns, no traditional combat, just you and the ocean. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying to feel completely alone in an environment designed to kill you. The full release ended up coming out in January of 2018, and this game did something rare in gaming. It didn't just succeed, it became a franchise. A franchise that people were emotionally attached to. Subnautica Below Zero came out in early access of the next year, and the full release came out in 2021. The fan base grew, the community grew, and people wishlisted the sequel, and that goodwill is exactly what made Unknown Worlds an attractive acquisition target. In 2021, post Subnautica Below Zero, Krafton, the South Korean publisher behind PUBG Battlegrounds, which at its peak had over 75 million players, acquired Unknown Worlds. It was standard industry stuff on the surface. Big publisher buys beloved indie studio. But written into that acquisition agreement was something unusual: a $250 million earn-out clause, meaning if Subnautica 2 hit a certain commercial milestone, that Krafton contractually obligated to pay $250 million to the studio's founders and development team. Not a performance bonus, not a discriminatory payout, a legal obligation. Something they signed and agreed to. For the first couple of years after the acquisition, things seemed to be moving in the right direction. Unknown Worlds was developing Subnautica 2, the kind of scope that matched everything the franchise had hoped for. Bigger world, more advanced technology, same philosophy that made the first game special. It let the environment tell a story. Respect the player's intelligence. Don't just hand them a gun and call it content. And the community showed up a single hour before gameplay was publicly available. Subnautica 2 accumulated over 5 million Steam wishlists. 5 million people saying, I trust you. I don't need a trailer. I don't need a review. I'm going to be there on launch day because you've already earned my trust. That doesn't just happen by accident. That's 10 years of goodwill. That's 10 years of Charlie Cleveland, Max McGuire, and with the addition of Ted Gill, making decisions that the community respected. The no combat philosophy, the deep lore, the emotional resonance of being alone in a vast alien ocean. That was all them. It was all the culture of Unknown Worlds. And that culture is the entire reason Subnautica 2 had 5 million wishlists before anyone had played a single minute of it. And then, sometime in spring of 2025, something changed. It was specifically in May if anybody wants to be a little bit technical. Krafton's own internal financial models were projecting that if Subnautica 2 launched in August as planned, it would sell over 1.67 million copies by Q4. That number would comfortably clear the earnout threshold, which meant Krafton would owe somewhere between $191 million and $242 million to the founders and development team. Krafton's CEO, Channingham Kim, did not want to pay that. According to the court documents, Kim had felt Krafton had overpaid for Unknown Worlds back in 2021 and was personally embarrassed by the terms of that deal. And he feared, and I'm going to be specific here because this is on legal record, he feared that cutting a $250 million check to the founders would make him look like a pushover, something that he wrote in the contract and agreed to. So Krafton launched what they internally called Project X. Project X was a month-long internal effort to manufacture legitimate justifications for firing the Unknown Worlds founders. If they could just fire them for a cause, meaning documented misconduct, the earnout clause would be voided. No contract breach. No $250 million. And here's one detail I cannot get past. During Project X, Krafton's CEO consulted ChatGPT multiple times, specifically to figure out how to frame the leadership and change publicity without triggering fan backlash. Now, I'll admit, I've used ChatGPT many times in the past. Sometimes I use AI to double check every once in a while if I'm accurate or not, and sometimes it's wrong. For a multi-million-dollar company to use it, come on. A billion-dollar company built a secret internal operation to void a $250 million legal obligation and use a free AI chatbot to manage the story? On July 1st of 2025, Krafton fired Charlie Cleveland, Max McGuire, and Ted Gill, the three people who created the Subnautica franchise. 1 week later, they announced Subnautica 2. How convenient. They announced that Subnautica 2 was being delayed past the year's end deadline. That same deadline that was tied to the $250 million payout. Krafton claimed that the founders had been neglecting the project, abandoning their responsibilities, stealing data on their way out. Now, let me show you what the record actually shows, because this is where everything becomes airtight. The timing. Krafton's first decision to fire founders came within weeks of their own internal projects confirming the earnout would trigger. That is not a coincidence. That is a documented paper trail connecting a financial motive directly to personnel actions. Second, the accusations collapsed under scrutiny. Every major claim Krafton made, neglect, data theft, abandonment of duties, was examined by the court. None of it held up. The evidence Krafton presented did not support the conclusions that they were drawing. Charlie Cleveland put into a public statement just 2 days after the firing. Also, Bloomberg dropped a report shortly after that revealing the $250 million earnout to the public. Then the lawsuit was filed. Third, the court had found Krafton had improperly seized operational control of Unknown Worlds. They didn't just fire the founders. They took over a studio they were supposed to just be a hands-off publisher for. Basically, they bought the studio with the understanding that the Unknown Worlds infrastructure will stay the same, but instead they were very hands-on, which was not a part of the deal. They violated the structural terms of their own acquisition agreement. And then there's the ruling. On March 16th, 2026, Vice Chancellor Lori W. Will of the Delaware Chancery Court, or however you pronounce that word, handed down her decision. And I want to read this directly because I think the exact words matter way more than my paraphrasing. Krafton breached the agreement by terminating the key employees without valid cause and improperly seizing operational control of Unknown Worlds. Ted Gill was reinstated as CEO immediately. Krafton was legally barred from interfering with his authority. The judge gave him full operational control over the early access of the Steam launch. And on top of that, he gave him full control of the earnout deadline. The one Krafton manufactured a delay to miss. It was extended to September 15th, 2026. Now, I'm going to say this. I have a feeling he chose specifically September 15, 2026, because that's roughly the amount of time they would have had if they released it in August and had until the end of 2025. He wanted to give Krafton an earnest try at beating them. 9 months of legal strategy, a secret internal project, a PR campaign partially drafted by an AI chatbot, all of it dismissed in a single ruling. Now here's where I want to be fair because I think you deserve that. Krafton's argument before court was not nothing. Their position was that the founders had become difficult to manage after the acquisition. The creative disagreements had escalated into dysfunction. That Unknown Worlds leadership was pulling in directions that misaligned with Krafton's vision for the project. And it's worth saying plainly, that happens. Large acquisitions fail all the time because of genuine culture clashes, and small studios with large publishers don't mix well. Take Hytale and Riot as an example. Several years of development only for the game to be cancelled and bought back. It's a documented pattern across the entire industry. It just also doesn't help that the acquisition was supposed to be a hands-off acquisition, but it became a hands-on one. If the founders had genuinely committed misconduct, if there was any actual neglect, if data was actually being stolen, firing them for a cause would have been Krafton's legal right. The earn-out clause wasn't unconditional. But here's where that argument falls apart. The court examined the exact same evidence Krafton presented and called it pretextual. That's a specific legal word. It doesn't mean that the court didn't believe the founders more. It means the court had determined that the evidence that Krafton offered did not support the conclusions they drew. That's a high bar when it comes to evidence. And Krafton's didn't come close. The Project X documents, the internal emails, the planning meetings, the ChatGPT consultations, those do not read like a company dealing with a genuine personal crisis. They read it like a company building a case that didn't exist already, that it was built specifically to screw over other people. There is a fundamental difference between documenting real misconduct and engineering a justification to fire someone. The court found the latter. Subnautica 2 launched in early access on May 14th, 2026, with the founders back as CEO, with the team that built the franchise leading the release. Within less than just 2 hours of its release, Subnautica 2 sold 1 million copies. 4 million copies inside a week, and over $100 million in revenue. Numbers like that put it directly into the conversation as the biggest early access launch in Steam's history. Reddit called it the most polished early access game they've ever played. The community spent 9 months worried, angry, confused, but still showed up on day one like nothing happened. Every single person who wishlisted the game made a choice about who they trusted, and it wasn't Krafton. So here's the verdict. Krafton is going to have to write a $250 million check, not because they want to, not because they believe they were wrong, but because the court ordered them to. And the game earned it anyway. And it's not like they're taking it at a loss either. Yes, the game raised $100 million in revenue, but who says that the game's going to stop selling? This game can keep going up. They can release DLCs and make more money off the game. Every move they made to avoid it turned the inevitable into a reality. So I want to know what you think. Was this the most clear-cut case in corporate greed that you've seen in the gaming industry? Or do you think somewhere in all of this, Krafton had a point? Drop it in the comments down below. Have a good one. Peace.